Welcome back, everyone. Today we're going to do a deep dive into motivation, reaching our goals, all that good stuff. We're looking at a recent Jay Shetty podcast episode. He was talking to Rob Dial. He wrote, Level Up. It's like a cheat sheet, right? Figuring out what makes us tick,
Yeah.
what holds us back, and how we can make those big dreams happen.
All right. Sounds like a plan. So what can we pull out of this to help people understand how our minds work when it comes to goals?
One thing that hit me was how Dial talks about fear. Like, he breaks it down. Primal fear.
Yeah.
Makes sense, right? Running from danger, that's instinct. But then there's intellectual fear.
Yeah. That's where things get interesting.
It is. It's the fear we make up in our heads. And it can be just as bad, just as paralyzing.
It feels so real, though, even if the danger isn't, actually there.
Exactly.
Dial talks about this thing, about judging people at the grocery store. Like, he realized he was putting all these insecurities of his on to total strangers, making up stories not even real.
Oh, I do that all the time. Think everyone's staring, judging my every move.
Right. But his point is, that kind of thinking, it can really hold us back.
For sure. So how do we deal with these fears? How do we stop them from, sabotaging our goals?
Dial has this three-step thing: awareness, practice, and repetition. First, you got to see those thoughts, the ones that keep popping up. Are they actually helping?
Yeah.
Or just making you more anxious?
Right, got to check in with yourself.
Then you actually got to practice changing your mind. He gives this example, forcing himself to find 3 things he liked about someone he judged at first, like intentionally flipping the script.
It's like turning those judgmental thoughts completely around. It's like, that visualization where your thoughts are cars driving by. You don't have to jump in every single one. Just let them pass.
Exactly. And the more you practice that, the easier it gets to rewire how you think. But, be kind to yourself. Change takes time.
Absolutely. And speaking of rewiring, Dial talks about having a strong why. Like, your reason for going after something, if it's strong enough, the how will work itself out.
Yeah.
It's like we get so caught up in the details, overwhelm ourselves before we even begin.
Yeah. Big difference between, fleeting motivation and that deep down drive.
For sure.
He tells the story about a client fixated on making $100,000, but when he dug deeper, the guy's real why was about safety, security for his kids. Now that's powerful.
Totally. It's not about the money then. It's something much bigger. Makes you think about all the amazing things people have done just because their why was so strong.
It's true. Think about parents working so hard for their families, or people overcoming huge obstacles for their passions. That takes serious commitment, and it comes from purpose.
So we've got fear, we've got why. Now I'm curious about procrastination. Is it just laziness? Or is there more to it?
Dial links it right back to fear, that same fear we talked about. We put things off because we're afraid to fail, or be judged, or face the unknown.
Makes sense.
He has this wild example. Someone needs to make $1 million. Stakes are super high, their loved ones depend on it. Suddenly, they can overcome procrastination and take action. Shows you fear can be a wall, but a strong why that can help you break through it.
So what are we putting off right now? And what fears are we avoiding? Maybe it's not laziness, but something deeper.
Exactly. And once you understand those fears, that's the first step to handling them.
This is where things get a bit, existential. Dial talks about the illusion of arrival, this idea that hitting a certain goal, boom, automatic happiness and fulfillment. But is it always true?
Well, Dial's own life says no. He had financial success young, but felt empty, unfulfilled. Even said he felt like he was withering away, even though he had what he thought he wanted.
Yeah, it's like we chase these things thinking they'll bring lasting happiness, but they often don't.
It's a big misconception, our culture equates success with stuff we achieve outside ourselves. But real fulfillment, it often comes from somewhere much deeper. Dial's journey was about turning inward, finding peace, connecting with his true self. He even uses this analogy like filling a cup of personal development, then discovering a whole bucket of spiritual development waiting.
Oh, I relate to that. Reaching a goal and the feeling fades so fast.
It happens to a lot of people, but Dial reminds us lasting fulfillment, it often comes from a deeper connection with ourselves, with our purpose.
So how do we actually build that connection? In our own lives, I mean.
Dial's big on silence and introspection. He talks about spending hours on his porch just being present with his thoughts and emotions. But in our world, with everything going on, that can feel impossible.
It takes real effort.
He admits he had bad anxiety when he first started being silent, like he was avoiding facing his inner world.
It's like we're so used to constant noise, silence becomes scary.
Yeah. But instead of running, Dial got curious about those feelings. That shift from avoiding to being curious, that's huge.
So how do we actually make space for silence when there's distractions everywhere?
Dial says start small, 5 minutes of meditation in the morning, or walk without your phone. The point is to create space for things to come up, emotions, insights.
It's like that analogy he used, the polar bear and impala bear, releasing trauma. By shaking, literally, it shows how important it is to process our emotions, not bottle them up.
Exactly. Whether it's through movement, writing, or just being still, finding healthy ways to deal with our emotions, it's crucial.
We've covered so much fear. Why? Turning inward. What else stood out to you from that conversation?
I loved those quick-fire questions Shetty asked at the end. It was like distilling Dial's core beliefs.
Oh, yeah, those were great. What were some of the highlights?
When asked for the best advice he'd gotten, Dial said, everything is your fault.
Wow, that's a powerful statement. Kind of harsh at first.
It is. But it's about taking responsibility, not blaming outside stuff. It's realizing we have power over our own lives.
Like we're in the driver's seat. We have more control than we realize. What about the worst advice he got?
He said it was fit in with everybody else.
Makes sense. It's easy to get caught up in trying to please others, conform to expectations. But as we see with Dial, real fulfillment often comes from being ourselves, blazing our own trail.
Exactly. Be authentic. Honor what makes you you. Now, pop quiz. What do you think Dial's most repeated thought is?
With all the self-love and acceptance stuff, I'm going to guess something like, I am enough.
Yeah.
Or I am worthy.
Close. He actually says, I'm proud of you.
Oh, I love that. It's all about self-compassion, acknowledging his own growth.
Simple, but powerful. And it makes you think, what if we all did that more, gave ourselves credit?
All right, last one. What habit did Dial say changed his life?
He credits meditation and breath work, but more specifically, just finding space for himself.
Makes total sense. With all the silence and reflection stuff, it's about making time for that connection.
And it leads right into his last answer. When asked about a law everyone should follow, he said, take 5 minutes every day to practice self-awareness.
That's a great challenge. We go through life on autopilot so easily. Dial's pushing us to be more conscious, intentional.
It's about stepping back, observing our thoughts, feelings, actions. Then, from that place of awareness, we can make better choices, choices that match our values.
Wow. So much in one conversation. I'm already feeling inspired to, make some changes.
Me too. It's amazing how a little shift in thinking can have such a big impact.
Before we wrap up part 1 of this deep dive, I want to leave you with a question to think about. What parts of yourself are you trying to change? Maybe even suppress? Can you, like Dial suggests, find a way to accept them, love them even, and use them to your advantage? We'll dive into that more in part 2. Stay tuned.
It makes you think, right? Like, what are we so afraid of? What are we hiding from?
And Dial's own story is a great example. He talked about hating those parts of himself, the selfish stuff, the judgmental stuff.
Oh, yeah. He spent years trying to fight them, but it didn't work.
It's like the more you resist something, the stronger it gets.
Exactly. He realized changing those parts wasn't the answer. It was about accepting them, even loving them.
Wow, that's a big shift.
And he figured out he could actually use those tendencies, like, in a good way.
Really?
Yeah, like his ambition, his drive, he could channel that into writing a better book, reaching more people.
So it's not about getting rid of those parts of us. It's about understanding them, integrating them. I think that's a huge takeaway.
Totally. Personal growth isn't about becoming someone else entirely. It's about, like, becoming whole.
Yeah.
Embracing all the different sides of who we are.
Absolutely. And it makes me think about that idea of duality. Shetty and Dial touched on that too, right?
Oh, yeah. They talked about recognizing both how significant and insignificant our lives are, like, at the same time.
That's a tricky balance. It's like we want to do great things, make a difference, but also remember we're just one tiny part of a huge universe.
It's a paradox, right? But holding both those ideas at the same time, it can be really freeing.
How so?
It lets you go after your goals with passion, with purpose, but without taking yourself too seriously.
It's like playing the game of life, giving it your all, but knowing you don't control everything. And that's where peace comes in, right? Being present.
Exactly. When you let go of that need to control everything, you make space for joy, for spontaneity, for things to just flow.
I like that.
Dial talks about how, as we grow up, we lose that joy, that playfulness.
It's true, the seriousness of adulting takes over.
But as Dial found out, that inner child is still there, waiting to be reconnected with.
So how do we tap back into that?
It's about rediscovering that wonder, that curiosity, seeing the world with new eyes.
That sounds amazing, but also really hard.
It is. And Dial points out one of the biggest obstacles: distraction. Our world is constantly pulling at our attention.
Oh, tell me about it. Notifications, emails, endless scrolling. It's no wonder we can't find a moment of peace.
And Dial took a pretty drastic step. He deleted Instagram.
Whoa! Talk about a commitment to being present.
It was about creating more space in his life for real connection.
That's a powerful statement. It reminds us we have a choice. We get to choose what we focus on.
What we focus on grows. And Dial, he wants to be present for his family. He believes true fulfillment comes from those relationships, not from our phones.
That's such a good reminder, especially in a world that's designed to keep us distracted.
We have to be intentional, choose how we spend our time, our energy.
Absolutely. Before we move on to part 3, I have another question for our listeners. What steps can you take to reclaim your attention? Live more intentionally. It doesn't have to be huge. Maybe it's setting boundaries with your phone or taking a good look at your priorities. Ask yourself, what truly matters?
It really comes down to that, doesn't it? Making choices that line up with what we care about.
This deep dive has been, I don't know, kind of mind-blowing. We've talked about fear, having a strong why, being present, self-awareness. It's a lot.
It is. But it's amazing how these basic ideas can be so powerful.
Totally. So as we wrap up, what are the big things you hope people take away from this?
Well, first, remember that fear, a lot of times, is in our heads, especially that intellectual fear. It feels real, but we don't have to let it run the show. When we learn to spot our fears and practice changing our thinking, we can break through those mental blocks and actually move towards what we want.
And that takes us right to the second takeaway, right? Having a strong why. Like, it's not enough to just want something.
Nope. You need that deep reason, the fuel that keeps you going when things get tough.
I couldn't agree more.
And last but not least, remember that fulfillment. It often comes from looking inward, building a better connection with ourselves, taking time for quiet reflection, finding peace in the present moment.
This has been a great reminder that, personal growth, it's a journey. Always something new to learn.
Definitely. And you don't have to do it all at once. Little steps. Be patient. Celebrate those wins along the way.
If you're looking for more inspiration, practical stuff, you got to check out Dial's book, Level Up. So much good advice on beating procrastination, finding your why, and creating a life that really lights you up.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Well, that's about it for this deep dive. Thanks for joining us. We'll catch you next time for another one. Until then, keep asking those questions, keep growing, and keep going after that life filled with purpose and meaning.